All right.
Today I'm here with Diane Helbig, Business and Leadership Development Advisor at Helbig Enterprises, a firm specializing in helping aspiring entrepreneurs, small business owners, and sales professionals succeed. How are you today, Diane?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. Can we kick off with a little bit about your background?
Sure. So, always in small business, always worked in small business and leadership and in sales. And in late 2005, decided it was time for me to go do my own thing. So, took all that experience and knowledge and launched a advisory and consulting practice. And I've been doing that ever since, working mainly with small business owners.
Great. So, what are your top three leadership principles that you attribute to success?
So I would say honesty, integrity, and listening.
All right. Well, let's talk about honesty. What's the story behind that?
Honesty. Okay. I'm thinking of a Billy Joel song, right? Like these words are coming to me. Honesty is such a lonely word. Everyone is so untrue. I don't know why. It just popped into my head. But I, I think it's easier to be honest, just to tell the truth. That way you don't have to remember who you said what to. And I think people can tell when people are being dishonest and when they're being honest. So it helps people learn how to trust sooner because they can just tell that they're being given the straight story and they don't have to wonder about motives.
I think you had a good point. People can tell when you're not being honest,
Mm-hmm.
or it just comes out at some point
Yes.
because it's
Right.
the story circles back, those the little elements to it, and the slightest thing that comes off, it's very noticeable, and then all of a sudden, all your credibility is out the window.
Gone. And you know what? Then you can't get it back. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because, oof,
Really hard, really hard
right.
to get it back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what how could we break this down into practical steps in terms of being honest and carrying that out?
So I would say communicate first with people. I think if we're ahead of the conversation, like I think a lot of leaders think that they either shouldn't share certain information or that everybody knows what they know. And if I go backward with that, everybody doesn't know what you know. Even if you think you've told them once, they still don't know, or they might not know. And waiting for people to ask you a question creates um, discomfort for people. So when the leader says, okay, I'm just going to tell you what's going on, I'm going to tell you how, where we're at, what I need from you, whatever those things are, then people feel more comfortable. So, and more trusting because you're not waiting for them to come to you and say, hey, what's going on? Or, creating the rumor mill, right? One of the most dangerous things in a business is the rumor mill. When you let people make up their own mind, they're going to go to the worst possible scenario. And it's hard to clean up after that. So hit it head on, talk to your people, tell them what's going on, good and bad, but have those open exchanges and seek information back from them, like help them understand that you welcome conversation.
So it sounds like a part of the approach to being honest is transparency. Just being
Definitely.
transparent about what's going on, both good and bad,
Yeah.
and start with that. Just being comfortable addressing things as they're happening.
Right. Because people know if you're holding something back, they know if you're not telling them the truth. They know if you're uncomfortable with the conversation you're having. And could you imagine and you might be able to because it happens all the time. You're not being forthcoming. People sense something's going on. They feel it, they intuit, whatever. They get very uncomfortable. They go to the worst possible, DEFCON 5. They start looking for a job because they don't know what's going on, but they've developed a whole story in their head. Now you lose good people because you didn't just talk to them. You didn't
Right.
tell them what was going on. You left it up to them.
And I think that's human nature. You want to be around people that you trust.
Yes, you do. Yeah. And employees really need it. They've got enough going on. They have to know what's expected of them, what they can expect from others, that there is open and honest communication. It just makes it so much easier to get them engaged and on board with you. It's, do you want to work smart or what do you want to work hard? Smart. So,
It's great examples. Should we talk about integrity and how do you see integrity?
okay. So I think, they say integrity is doing the right thing, even if no one knows that you're doing it. And I really believe that. I think living in integrity means that you are making the right decisions at the right time for the right reasons. And you're always operating that way. Like, you have one gear, one speed, and it is always to do the right thing. You don't compromise on your values. You don't let other people sway you and convince you to do things that don't feel right. I think being in integrity keeps us from making the wrong decisions. It keeps us focused on our mission and our vision. And once again, like honesty, it's easier to be in integrity when you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day. You're in integrity. You've made the right decisions. You've done the right thing for the right reasons.
That really makes a lot of sense. And it's, I like the way you explain it too, where you're set on doing what is the right thing because you could get pressured in doing things that you feel. And I feel like that's part of growing up is you get in those situations where, and it just happens time after time. And especially when you get into your career, you're always going to get these situations where back of your head's talking to you and saying, "Hey, this isn't right," but you still get swayed in doing it just because of the other incentives involved, be it money or glamour or anything. So it's really sticking to that. It's important, and it's, to me, I think it's like thinking long term too, where, hey, if you're compromising those values you have, then it's going to affect you in the long run. Where you may have some big goals ahead of you.
Right.
And that could shift you off.
Well, and once again, it's hard to trust someone who isn't living in integrity, right? And we have to remember that people know, people can tell, they can feel it, they can see it. And it's hard to succeed. It's hard to get very far, as you said, with the long run, if you're compromising. Because, then where are your values? Then anyone can, they change with the wind. Well, then no one can really trust you to be a good business partner, to be a good employee, to be a good manager. It just doesn't get you anywhere.
How can we break this one down into practical steps?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. So I would say living, it's interesting because it goes along with honesty. So living in integrity is saying that you're always going to do what's right. So it might look like this. Oh, this will be an interesting one. You're in a family business and you have a family member in the business who either shouldn't be in the business or shouldn't be in the position that they're in. Now, the truth is, everyone in the company knows it. right? So you're not fooling anybody. Living in integrity would mean that you would get them out of that position or out of the company. It's hard to do, right? It can cause discomfort, but it is the right thing to do for the company, for the employees, and for people to be able to trust you that you're making the right decisions for everyone involved, including that person, because they can't be happy.
That's a good example. Like really being able to stand up for the right thing, even though it may be a tough conversation or tough decision to make, but ultimately doing it. And I think it's a skill of its own. Like it gets easier as you confront those difficult situations.
Yeah, once you do it once and you realize it didn't kill you and it didn't kill the other person, right? Then you can do it because you realize it's really not that bad and the result is so good that the result being good outweighs the discomfort of having the conversation, I think.
I particularly found that the situation you described, where you have somebody in the wrong role, that it is a tough conversation to have. But once you do have it, you'll find somebody that's a better fit, which is great for the company. But what I've noticed is almost 10 times out of 10, that person will find a role that's better fit for them. And they end up
Exactly.
being actually happier. So it ends up being a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've had people actually come back to me and say, thank you so much for helping me leave, right? Like it doesn't have to be a bad thing. You can do it together, but they're really not happy with what they're doing because it's not them. It's not right for them. So, yeah, you're right. It ends up being good for everybody involved.
Right. And that's a good example. Just doing the right thing, even though it may be a tougher thing to get done. And
Right.
the other thing you mentioned is listening.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Oh my gosh. I think listening is important no matter what you're doing because I don't think we listen well enough. And we oftentimes listen um, with the wrong ears. So sometimes we listen with outcome bias. We've already decided how the conversation is going to go. So the way we listen isn't very active. Or we listen to rebut, or we listen, we're distracted. These days, everyone's distracted. There's this distracted listening thing. Active listening is pretty hard, but good leaders know that it's really important to listen, probably more than they speak, because an active listening, because they really want to know, first of all, what's really going on in their organization or with their client or their vendor or whoever it is. But they also want other people to know that they're listening, that they care to that level. And the only way you can do it is by being a good listener. Like you can't fake it. All these things, you can't fake it. These are the things that you show up as your best self when you're doing these things. So it's being present in the moment and listening and even inviting conversations, inviting people to tell you things. And then they know that you're going to really listen when they tell you and you're going to respond to what they tell you. So, there's this thing, there are no bad ideas. There's only ideas we can't implement right now. So we want our people telling us their ideas. If we make sure they understand, we're not necessarily going to be able to implement every single idea that comes about, but we want to hear them. That's how the good ideas, percolate to the top because we're listening and people know we're listening and that we really want to hear what they have to say. They're more engaged. They have more ownership over, what they're doing in their role. There's no downside. And we hear sometimes things that they're not saying that we then need to ask about or push on.
People want their voices to be heard.
Yes, they do. Right. Isn't that what they say, that what people want more than anything is to know they're being heard? They don't
Right.
even necessarily want to be agreed with.
Yep.
They just want to know.
People are listening. And
Uh-huh.
I think even managing multiple teams, the best ideas don't come from the top. So it's important to have those ears open, because if you're not listening, you're not using your
Right.
resources as well as you can.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
When you mention outcome based listening, can you explain that a little bit? As because there are
Oh,
a few challenges with sort of today, and I think you're right. We don't emphasize listening as a skill as much as we should.
yeah.
But I feel like there's sort of social challenges with it, and that you mentioned outcome based. I'm curious what your thought was around that.
So I firmly believe that we as humans have a tendency to believe we know what the outcome of a conversation is going to be before we ever enter into it.
I see.
And you can even think, right? So yeah, you can think about conversations that you've either had or you've avoided because, if you avoided it, it's because you thought you knew what the outcome was going to be. The problem with outcome bias listening is that we're not really listening because we've already determined that we think we know what we're going to hear. So we don't hear what the other person is really saying. They may say exactly what we thought they were going to, but they may not. And we miss that whole ability to have a really good, meaningful, genuine conversation because we've already decided, that we know what's going to happen. And what we're really doing is we're preparing for our response. And our response oftentimes is emotional instead of straightforward and fact based. Because, right, we've already built this up in our head. If you've ever had a conversation with someone where like they reacted and you just looked at them and went, whoa, what? They had outcome bias before they ever entered into the conversation. They were expecting you to communicate in a certain way. So whether you did or not, that's what they heard. It
I
doesn't work.
I now I get a clear understanding of this. So I remember validating business ideas, and this is often the challenge that happens, where in a lot of ways you're being persuasive, and whether you're knowing it or unknowing. And I think this is where you want to be able to completely abstract that and get away from those kind of biases with this
Yeah.
approach on listening. And I almost feel like there's an approach that helped me was entering the conversation with the mindset that you don't know anything, or that
Right.
whatever you know is wrong.
Yeah.
And that sort of gets you starting. And it's surprising, because even if you meet with somebody and you're like, I'm the subject expert on this topic, I know everything there is to know about it. I can't possibly learn anything else from this person. Waste my time. But to again flip it and get into that, hey, I'm wrong about everything.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, you always learn something from somebody.
Right. Right. And they feel valued and validated and respected. And that's how every conversation should go. Right? Both parties should feel like they matter and there was a reason for them to be there. Right? Like, why would someone have a conversation with you if you already knew everything?
Right.
You could just tell them, you didn't have to listen to anything they had to say. You could just tell them yes or no, right? You just go through and red pencil and say, no, yeah.
So
We have to be able to hear.
one of the things I struggle with is in a conversation, you want to listen, but your mind wanders off to dig up the next thing you're going to say.
Mhm.
And you're sort of thinking about that. You have this conscious stream in the back of your head about where you're taking this conversation, what points you want to get out,
Yeah.
what are you going to say, those things.
Yeah.
How do you get your mind focused on intently listening without those challenges or distractions that happen within your own head?
So that's probably the most challenging of all. So I think one of the easiest ways of doing that is to maintain eye contact with the person. Because when you're looking at them, you are paying attention to them. You are focused on them, probably more so than the words that they're saying. And then it's a skill that you build. So if you notice yourself thinking about how you want to respond, then you sort of have to kick yourself in your head and go, okay, wait, I just want to listen. I'm just present in the moment. It's that whole mindfulness, I am here right now. I am not a couple minutes from now. So it takes practice, and owning when you don't do it. So owning to yourself, you can even own it to the other person and say, would you mind, giving that back? Would you mind sharing that again? I want to make sure I really heard what you were sharing. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to say, hey, I was thinking about what I was going to say next, but you can say, I just want to make sure I'm really grasping what it is that you're sharing with me.
I like that. You're getting permission basically to get back in the conversation and not get lost and stay lost in it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things I do is I take notes. So if I do get that thought in my head, I'll write like a one word keyword or something down real quick to say, okay, let me come back to it and then really get back into listening.
Right. I think that's a great thing to do, as long as you come back.
Right.
Which you do. I know. I know that you sort of, and I will even say to someone, hang on a second. I just want to jot myself a quick note to refer to later. And then I can come back. It's some people do it naturally, like you, where they'll just, quickly jot something down. Some people like me have to go, hang on. And because I want to make sure I'm in the conversation, but I don't want to lose the thread either. So it is a balancing act. Once again, being an honest communicator, and there's no downside to saying, could you hang on for 1 second? I don't want to lose that, but I don't want to be thinking about it while you're talking. It's very respectful.
I agree. When you're listening, is there any particular things you should be listening for?
Yeah. So, so it depends on the conversation, of course. I think you want to listen for how people communicate, and also how effectively or ineffectively. So what I mean by how they communicate is, what's their tone? What's their posture?
Yep.
Right? Just how are they showing up? Because that tells you a lot about where they are in their head. But you also want to be paying attention to the point where, if you feel like they aren't telling you everything, that you can read that. Or maybe they're talking around an issue instead of really landing. What a lot of people do is then they talk. So, for example, you're sitting down with an employee, they're not doing something as well as they should, and you're asking them, questions about it, whatever. So, why do you think this is happening? Well, I don't know, Susie over there, no, whatever. And so oftentimes the leader will say, okay, well, listen, that needs to stop. Do you feel me? And the person will say, sure. Okay, great. Thanks for having this conversation. And they walk out, and there's no commitment. There's no ownership. There's no real understanding that it's on them. So part of the listening is being able to sit in silence, right? It's being able to say to the person, help me understand what your thought process was here. And then being quiet and making them tell you. Because if they get used to you talking for them, they will always let you talk for them, and they will never take ownership, and you will never solve a problem with them.
That's a really good point. Because again, it goes back to that natural tendency to make your points across and push the things that you have in your mind and your agendas, when reality is you don't. You want to allow that person to really share their thoughts and ideas, but maybe even encouraging it by asking some of these questions to allow them to tell more.
Right.
Like, hey, tell me more about that. Tell me more about the issue that you're dealing with. And just the why is always a good one. That's the one thing I learned from kids. There's an infinite amount of times you can ask why in a conversation. Uh,
Exactly.
and that really helps a lot because then it keeps that attention on the person. So I think even throwing in just some of those, maybe you had a thought in mind, but rephrasing it as a question, allow that person keep continuing the conversation on that same topic and thread and getting additional information. Uh,
Yeah, because right, it goes along with outcome bias. If you think you already know why they didn't fill out their report and get it to you on time, then that's how you're going to enter the conversation with that belief. Well, you might know, but you might not. So, and you know what? It doesn't matter. They have to own it. So you have to say, help me understand what happened here that you couldn't get, that you didn't get the report to me on time.
yeah, that, well, that works out really well. Then it goes back to that whole just get that information layered in the conversation questions in there and really.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can be, then you are so present because you're just waiting for them to tell you something. And then if they start telling you things that don't pertain, you can say, okay, I hear that. Help me understand how that has anything to do with this, right? Because you're there, you're going with them wherever it is they're going. And that is how problems get solved. Either the person realizes they can't keep getting away with whatever it is they're getting away with, and so they start towing the line, or they leave because they don't want to be held accountable. Either way, you win.
I like it. It keeps the conversations intimate and meaningful.
Right? Let's just let them be responsible for them and their actions and their behavior. And let's not assume that we know anything, right? I don't know anything. Tell me.
I think, yeah, that's, you got a really good point there. That's the hardest part is getting rid of the biases in the conversation, really coming at it with a clean slate,
Yeah.
intently listening, layering in some of those questions to get the person feeling comfortable
Yeah.
speaking and getting that level of depth in the conversation that you're really, and lo and behold, you may find that there's some really interesting parts in that conversation by being engaged and focused on the other person.
Exactly. That's right. You're going to learn an awful lot, right?
What other thoughts do we have? I have a note about objective feedback.
Oh, yeah. So this, I feel like this goes along with everything that we've been talking about, that it's not just about giving other people feedback, but being open to receiving feedback, creating feedback loops so that you're encouraging people to tell you how they're feeling about things, any ideas they have, anything they're struggling with, anything they feel like they need as far as a resource goes. So, if you create a no judgment zone where people know they can feel comfortable speaking, that's when you're going to have the best conversations and the best idea sessions and the best problem solving is going to go on then, because then you're like co-creating a solution and everyone's involved in that that creation. So they have buy-in automatically. You're not trying to convince them that they need to believe in something because they already do.
I like that. I like framing it that way because then you set the tone and saying, "Hey, we're not judging you on anything. Just speak, be yourself, be open." So
Right.
I like that because I think in what happens is a lot of times in business we tend to fuse our business and personal communications together, and people are often worried about the personal perspectives that others are going to have, and maybe that prevents them from being as open and voicing their thoughts as much as they would like to or should. So I do like being open and framing that because then it does, break down some of those barriers
Yeah.
for those that may not be comfortable speaking up when they should be.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to get the emotion out of it, right? We have to be able to communicate objectively toward a common goal. like if we really understand the vision and the mission, and if the leader is really communicating that often and effectively and honestly and openly, then everyone can communicate in a way that points toward the vision and the mission, not toward someone. It's not a personal attack, it's problem solving. It's creating ideas and exploring, and you can call it anything. It's not personal.
That's a really good way to think through it. Is there anything else regarding listening before we wrap up here, Diane?
That's a good question. I think it's hard. I mean, I will say that I think active listening is difficult. I think the more you get comfortable with seeking information from other people and you're comfortable with silence, the easier it is to become a really good listener, right? Because it's so I have this belief that leaders are not supposed to have all the answers. Their job is to convene the conversations and the resources to find the answers. So maybe if they let themselves off the hook with, I have to have all the answers, I have to solve all the problems, they'll be more open to asking questions, seeking information, and really listening to what people have to say. And it's amazing how rich those conversations are, and can lead in a direction that you had no idea it was going to go in, but is so valuable for the business because you were open enough to just pay attention.
My favorite part is when you said be comfortable with silence, because
Yeah.
I remember a client of mine that was extremely good at that. That he would let the pauses go as long as he could, but then you would just keep talking because you might not have been as comfortable with it, but he gave you that room. So I think there's some truth to that, is being comfortable with silence.
It's hard. We hate it. Everyone does, it's that uncomfortable, but so someone has to fill the void. It just doesn't have to be you. If you figure they're uncomfortable with it too, okay, then it's a game of chicken, right? So,
Yeah, no, that's a good one just to use as an exercise when you want to practice better listening.
right. And practice at home. All these things it's about relationships. So you can practice this with your kids, with your spouse, with your, brother and sister, with your parents, anybody. You can practice this whole communication style anywhere.
And thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed discussing some of your leadership lessons and look forward to the next conversation.
Oh, thank you. This was fun. I appreciate it.